All right, so it looks like we're ready and live, and so we'll get going. So I'll
Um,
I'll cue you up and introduce you and frame the conversation and that sort of thing.
you
Good
tell me when
evening,
you're ready.
colleagues, and welcome to this special edition of the Guyana Business Journal Election Conversation Series. You know, in our last conversation, kind of David Hines reminded us of Guyana's political story and the fact that it cannot be separated from its history. And he spoke of three defining moments that continue to shape who we are as a people. The first was emancipation, when freed Africans walked off the plantations and built the remarkable village movement, which Hines and many scholars agree was unique in world history, where the formerly enslaved people immediately humanized the so-called wild coast, creating schools, churches, and economies from nothing. The second moment he identified in this long struggle for independence, from the uprisings of the 1930s to sovereignty in 1966. But Hines sort of noted that independence came with missed opportunities, missed chances at Caribbean unity and missed chances at power sharing. And those missed opportunities have left us trapped in ethnic political competition, a competition that has scarred our national project for decades. The third moment is now the age of oil, a moment that offers perhaps the final opportunity to redeem the unfulfilled promise of emancipation and independence, the promise of dignity, of equity, and a true economic democracy. Hines warned that Guyana's democracy still carries the imprint of autocracy. And he reminded us that we have all the trappings of democracy, but not yet its soul. The winner take all system persists. The ethnic logic of who governs still haunts us. And yet, with oil wealth, the social media democratizing public discourse, youth, the diaspora demanding more, this election is different. It is and potentially will be transformative. Or it could deepen our divisions. And it is against this profound historical backdrop that we now host a critical conversation with the leader of the opposition, Aubrey Norton, and the APNU's coalition presidential candidate for the September 1, 2025 elections. You know, as is our practice on the GBJ, we like to read the bios. We like to have people know who they're talking about. The audience is far and wide. And so it's vitally important that I tell you a bit about who Aubrey Norton is. He is one of Guyana's most seasoned and respected political leaders. He's widely recognized for his resilience, his experience, his unrelenting commitment to democratic principles and national development. He was born in Georgetown, educated in Guyana, Cuba, and the United Kingdom. He holds a diploma in political science from the Julio Antonio Mella College in Cuba, a bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Guyana, and a master's degree in international relations from the University of Kent in the United Kingdom. Norton's career has spanned nearly 4 decades in public service, academia, diplomacy, and grassroots organizing. He began his political journey in the PNC Youth Socialist Movement, the YSM, that I know many of folks who are listening are familiar with. Rose rapidly to become one of the youngest general secretaries in the history of the People's National Congress. He served in Guyana's foreign service, representing the country at the highest levels of diplomacy, and later lectured in political science at the University of Guyana, where he has shaped the minds of generations of young students. He has served nearly a decade in Parliament and was appointed presidential advisor on youth empowerment in 2015. In December 2021, Norton was elected leader of the PNCR with an overwhelming mandate and assumed the role of leader of the opposition in April of 2022. As the APNU's presidential candidate, Aubrey Compton Norton brings a rare blend of experience, independence of thought, and moral courage. He has consistently championed constitutional reform, electoral integrity, inclusive governance, recognizing that Guyana's long-term stability depends on healing historical divisions and ensuring that all communities feel represented. Norton's vision for Guyana centers on equitable management of oil and gas wealth, diversification of the economy, youth engagement, and defending Guyana's territorial integrity, particularly in the Essequibo controversy. He is known for, as is evident, his calm but determined leadership, and he is seen by his supporters as the leader best positioned to navigate the complexities of the oil era while keeping dignity, people, and democracy at the center of national progress. Mr. Aubrey Compton Norton, a leader of the opposition, thank you for joining us.
Good Thanks evening. For having me. Thanks for having me, and a good evening to you, your listening and viewing audience.
Let me begin by asking you to reflect on this historical context. You know, David Hines spoke about emancipation as a moment where ordinary people, against all odds, built villages, self-governing communities from nothing. He spoke of independence as an opportunity to transform this colonial state and to heal ethnic divisions. And now he says, you know, the oil wealth represents perhaps our final opportunity to deliver the substantive human freedom that our ancestors have dreamed of. Do you believe Guyana can finally fulfill this promise of emancipation and independence in the oil era? And how do you see your leadership contributing to this unfinished project?
I would say I agree generally with David, but I do not agree that the first major activity or impact was emancipation. I share Walter Rodney's view that the coming of the Europeans constituted a clash of cultures. And when the Europeans came to the then Guyana, spelled differently, they clashed with the indigenous people. And people missed the defining elements of that. First, it was a clash of cultures. Secondly, you had the resistance of the indigenous people who knew the jungles and resorted to the hinterland and left the Europeans without labor. And so they had to bring labor. And that is a defining moment because, in my opinion, it constitutes the first threat against the Europeans and our initial form of some kind of emancipation. And I believe if we don't garner that, we can miss a lot, because the present context, the indigenous community is going to play a critical role in determining these elections. And for us to not factor in them into the historical context, we can be missing. And I don't want us to miss. Having said that, I believe that we have to now, even as we look at the ethnic composition of the society, factor in the indigenous community. So it becomes the indigenous community in the main, the African Guyanese, and the Indo-Guyanese. To talk about moving Guyana forward, one has to not only focus on power sharing, but to focus on economic development of those who are in fact deprived of opportunities. In that regard, you have the indigenous community, which has not really developed a business class, And if they're going to play a proper role in the society, they need to develop a business class. The African Guyanese, who would have developed a business class, but that class suffered considerably under the present government. And you also have the Indo-Guyanese community, which we tend to put in one category. But when you look at it, there is an elite Indo-Guyanese community that forms a separate class from the average Indian Guyanese. And so if we are talking about dealing or giving leadership, we have to give leadership in a way that we seek to develop all the ethnic groups and ensure that they can survive in the society. It is in that context, I would say, that you're not going to deal with ethnic conflict only by talking. It has to go to the root, which is the allocation of economic and other resources to the people of Guyana. And unless we develop a system that allows for the empowerment of those who aren't empowered at the economic level, we'll be in deep trouble. As a leader, I think my task is really to develop a model that allows us to transcend the ethnic issues and to put Guyana on the path to some form of united development. I'm not idealist, and so I don't believe it's an easy task. I believe essentially it is a difficult task, but that if there can be changes in terms of the allocation of resources to putting it on a continuum, moving towards more economic involvement, then we stand a better chance of dealing with the ethnic problems, because we tend to treat the ethnic problem as political, but it is political, it is social, it is economic. And if one accepts that the economic element of it stands as the base, then to rectify it, even to talk about power sharing, power amongst unequals really don't amount to much power for the small group in that power symmetry. And so I'm talking here about an opportunity, and that is why we are saying in this election campaign, we are pursuing a people-centered development strategy in which we put people first, and we seek to have a reallocation of resources in a way that allows us to empower those who are less fortunate and ensure we create a level playing field in which there is equity. And notice I'm saying equity as distinct from equitable distribution, because to the extent that you have groups that stand at different points on the economic scale, if you use equality, you're going to be giving more to those who have. If you use equity, you're going to be giving more to those who have the least, and seeking to bridge the gap. And it is my considered view that we have to bridge that gap. We have to do it through the allocation of resources, cognizant of the fact that we need a political system that allows us to work together. We also need a social safety net that allow us to protect the vulnerable while we empower them. So I would say my vision is to really ensure that people are empowered and we reduce the gap between the rich and the poor, and begin that process of transformation and making each and every Guyanese to believe or feel that they have a stake in the national cake. That is what I would say on that.
A people-centered stake in the national cake. I like that. I like that. I like that phrase. Let me push you there. So this sort of functions in two ways. One, just to kind of, you've lived, many phases of Guyana's political journey, right? your early days as a youth activist in the PNC, to the Foreign Service, to the university classroom, eventually to the leadership of the party, to the presidential candidate. You've seen the power from multiple angles, outlined a vision of what you would want to see implemented. Tell us something about yourself and what lessons you've drawn from those experiences that would help you to shape that agenda, to move that agenda you've just described.
You made one mistake in your introduction by saying I was born in Josh. I was born in Linden.
I see.
And my Linden experience, I think, has created the kind of person I am. I born and grew up in Linden, in which, in my opinion, there was like a semi-apartheid. You had the bauxite company controlled by whites. You had marked divisions in the society. The Watuka where and Richmond Hill where the rich elite lived. You had Mackenzie, which was a little ahead of Wismar, Christianburg, where I'm from. So in some regard, I developed in a class divided society. And in that society, I would have seen people who have potential, but could not realize their potential because of the way the society disadvantaged people. And so when I went to Mackenzie High School, you were paying $26 a term, and that was a burden for poor people at the time. And therefore, when free education came to Guyana, to me, it was a new opening. And I've always said to people, I believe if free education didn't come, I would not have had the academic achievement that I have, because I just didn't have the resources to do it. And so I think I am conditioned by the fact that I grew up in a society that put a social net in place that allowed me to realize my potential. And as I see the gradual destruction of this social net that caught a lot of persons who had ability but didn't have the economic wherewithal, that allowed them to come out, get education, and to move on and up. I believe education is one of the great emancipators, in the sense that if you get a proper education, you utilize it properly, you can move up the social ladder. And I believe that condition, my whole philosophical approach, my whole sense of what is just in a society. I believe leaders must serve their society. They must not be seen as above the society. They must learn from the society, serve the society, and remove barriers to people realizing their best selves in the society. And I would say those are the kind of factors that inform the kind of person I am. Also, my father had this thing about him. He had a shop, and people who didn't have could have gone there and gotten what they wanted. But most important, I think I have garnered from my father and being around him in the shop, was that he had this thing that the end wasn't wealth. It was about serving and helping people. And I think that impacted my life. I had an aunt that had a restaurant, his sister that operated the same way. And I believe it is that put us in a particular direction. And this was compounded by our involvement in the first school strike in Mackenzie High School. There was a school strike in 1972 where our headmaster had died and a new headmaster was coming. But we as a deputy, a man named Josephus Backer, who had a degree, but he had the tendency to look out for us, the poor children in the school. And then they decided they were going to bring a man from Georgetown named McDonald, and I hold nothing against McDonald as a person. And we protested at school because most of us felt that this man, Joseph Baker, is the man who looked out for us. And mind you, Linden had a divide at that time. We on Wismar Christianburg were kind of seen as lesser than the people in Mackenzie, and the people in Mackenzie were seen as lesser than the people in Richmond Hill, etc. So when you had someone that was looking out for you, you tended to go in the direction of solidarity with that person. And then you started to develop this thing about looking after the vulnerable and be very concerned about the way those who have power wield power, especially against the disadvantaged.
Aubrey Norton, I think you hit some very central points. The point on education. I think we all, I was born in 1968, and so went to high school in 1979. And I think, just as you've described, my mother was the first person in our family to go off to the university. She was a teacher, and certainly the opportunity to go to the University of Guyana and to study at the University of Guyana certainly made a huge difference, not only for her as an individual, but for family and for our entire extended family. So I think I share with you that philosophy of the importance of education and meaningful education, and not just having a degree or an education that predisposes you to solve problems in the context of your community and to do the kind of stuff. Now I'll say something funny. One of my really good friends on a personal level is Mr. McDonald's son. Mr. McDonald is his father. So this world is very, very...
I know him, and I met him a few times. And I think I once said to him, I didn't campaign against your father. I campaigned against a system. So, in fact, the last time I saw him in Brooklyn, I did say that to him.
Yes.
I also want to add this.
Yeah.
Though I put that premium on education, I have been saying to those that I meet that are educated that we need to go a step forward and become involved in business. Because one of the problems of education is that you still have a boss, and we have to aspire to become our own bosses.
No, and that was a point I wanted to make too. As I listened to you, I heard a kind of, you talked about your father and your aunt having businesses and understanding. So I was about to say you had a kind of entrepreneurial spirit that's attended to the educational side. And I think that in some ways, these are the kinds of things that really become important for Guyana. And I'm glad that you're kind of surfacing that for us. So in that context, the big thing in the room is you can't escape this question of the oil. I read this article today about this argument between Hess and Chevron. Chevron paid $53 billion for Hess's 30% of the Stabroek block. This is not a small amount of money. So I wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts on how you manage this and beyond oil? How do you see rebuilding agriculture, strengthening manufacturing, creating new industries that ordinary Guyanese can create wealth for themselves, as you've just laid out? What's your thinking there? What's the plan in that regard?
I always feel that when we deal with Exxon, we have to put it in historical context. In the 70s, Burnham moved Guyana in the direction of seeking to own our natural resources. So you had in the society an interest in ownership. Now, that occurred during the Cold War, in which there was a clash between communism and capitalism, and it had negative consequences. You come now to oil in a new historical context, in a globalized world, and you also have a situation where we lack the capital and the human resource to develop the oil and gas sector. And therefore, we have to focus on a number of things. One, how do we increase the benefits to the people of Guyana in the present situation? And I've said publicly, I intend to engage people in the diaspora and as much expertise as we can find to engage Exxon to ensure that we can get more out of the agreement that we would have had. We have. Now, I'm well aware that it is not the era in which you could go renegotiating and destroying a contract. And so one has to understand the situation, look at the extant agreement, and find ways and means of increasing the benefit to the Guyanese people. That's the first thing I want to say. The second thing I want to say is that I see oil as the basis on which we will develop the non-oil sector. Oil is a resource that will finish. And therefore, in this era, we have to utilize oil to ensure we develop the agricultural sector, the agro-processing sector, the manufacturing sector, and the services and other sectors that will allow us to build a resilient economy when oil is cheap or the price is low and when it is non-existent. So for me, oil becomes a means towards an end. The end is building a strong, resilient economy with export-led trade and production, because if you continue to be a raw material-based economy, you will suffer all the ills that come with it. Now, in doing that, I think we have to promote a lot of micro and small businesses. But like I said here in Guyana, it demands us accessing our skills in the diaspora to help. It demands us ensuring that there is training in financial literacy and small business development. Because a lot of times you can put money in the hands of the people, but if those people don't have the skills to utilize it, it could be money gone down a hole. And so I've been arguing here that one of the first things we need to do is to develop sustainable agriculture in every region. Once we can get every region to produce the food they need and have some amount of food security, we can simultaneously begin the process of developing agro-processing, developing storage, refrigerated and otherwise, like in the case of rice silos, so that we have the capacity to store excess and then to transform them into value-added products. We also have got to take the opportunity. This government has made a mess of the gas to energy project. The project was conceptualized under us. We lost government, but we have got to take it back and ensure we work out the problems that are there and try to ensure we can get cheap electricity. For those who followed me, I have not been a protagonist of the pipeline. I was one who supported and argued for ISO containerized gas, where rather than running a pipeline, it permits us to bring it on shore. It also would have ensured easy access to trade it in the Caribbean. And so I think we will need to relook the energy sector. For me, the energy sector must be a skillful combination of oil and gas, solar, wind, and hydropower.
Yeah, that's the question.
We have to do proper feasibility studies to determine what we do where. in the hilly regions of Guyana, the high regions, there is also scope for us to reduce the use of fossil fuel to pump across the country and to use gravity flow. When I was a boy coming up in Linden, we passed all of these high tanks that had the water, and the water is distributed, and you're hearing an engine running. So I think it is something we should revisit. I was looking at some of it in Africa and saw that they were still applicable. We will have to look at the feasibility of it, but we need to have a combination that gives us cheap, affordable, and reliable energy so that we can expand the manufacturing and agro-processing sectors.
You know, one of the you as you talked about that, I thought about Dr. Ulrich Trotz, who's a frequent sort of communicator, and you know, he always reminds me that your earlier generation, one of the key things that you, as you described it, they had a science research council, they had the IAST, they started NARI. And so what seems critical as you lay out that vision is the need for some local scientific directorate that does science in the context of development. Is there any plan along the way of thinking through that
When our manifesto comes out, you will see that there's a focus on science, and you will see that we do believe that there is a need for an increased role and participation of the Institute of Applied Science and Technology. We have many, the world is into composite flour, where you can mix sweet potato and rice. We need a scientific support for things like that. And so I do believe that two things we should focus on. In our manifesto, we're saying that our development must be data-driven. One of the problems I think this government has is that they flick and hope they land on their feet, and sometimes they land on their head. But if you are guided by data, you will know exactly where you can invest, what you need to do in the sciences, what you need to do in the health sector. And it is my view that we will have to shift significant focus to mathematics and science, because concomitant to what we want to do, we will have to have that science and math base that is necessary.
You know, already the time is running. So let me make one small shift to another area which I think is of importance, this matter of sovereignty. You know, I think, you know, for many of us, the defense of Essequibo is really not just a territorial controversy. It's about preserving the dignity and the humanity of our forebears. And so, you know, how would you handle this challenge diplomatically and strategically while keeping Guyana's moral high ground intact on the international stage?
I think one of the first things we have to do is to revisit the history and develop the case that will allow us to mobilize support. In one of my budget presentations, I mentioned that Venezuela participated in the arbitral award through their reps, and that at the end of the arbitral award in 1899, Venezuela celebrated the fact that we lost land and they inherited land. Something that a lot of people do not know. One of the first things I will do is to ensure that that is out there. Because in 1899, the award came. In 1902, you had, or 1905, the mapping of it, etc. And Venezuela lived until 1962 before objecting. And so I believe we have a strong case, but we do not put it before the international community in that way. We might have done it in the International Court of Justice. But what I've said is that we will take out advertisement in Latin American newspapers in Spanish, putting out the case. You cannot expect people to support you if they don't know. And one of the greatest problems we have had in terms of mobilizing support internationally is the information deficit. We have to get rid of that information deficit. The second thing we have to do is to develop a competent diplomatic corps. The diplomatic corps, for the want of a better word, in the early days was a corps for high flyers, meaning extremely intelligent people with capacity to research and the capacity to articulate our position. We need to put the Foreign Service in order so it has the quality of person that could engage in the international community, make the case for Guyana, and mobilize support. The next thing is that economic activities play a role. Guyana, like any other oil-producing country, should set aside funds for oil diplomacy, where you use the resources at your disposal to help small states, while at the same time mobilizing those states in support of your cause. And I believe...
Actually, that's fine. I want to jump in. I mean, it's one of the things I've always felt is that CARICOM at this moment, I don't feel them sort of standing behind us in a vehement way. I mean, I feel them never being completely supportive of Guyana. Any thoughts about how your relationship in this regard might change with CARICOM, different from what we're experiencing now?
What I'm saying is what will change us with CARICOM. It is not CARICOM, the institution, that should mobilize support for us. It is we mobilize to the countries, Grenada, Jamaica, etc., and then they come and act in CARICOM. I would not blame CARICOM. CARICOM is a combination of states. Those states act. And if you develop the support and solidarity, the results coming out of CARICOM will be in your favor. And that is what I think we need to do. We need to, I believe in foreign policy in concentric circles. Your first line, you have Brazil, Venezuela, Suriname, and the Atlantic. We could hold the Atlantic as much as we could by sea defense. But when it comes to the others, Brazil is our greatest ally, and we need to keep constantly engaging Brazil and reinforcing it. Brazil has some 7 or 8 countries on its border, and therefore, by the very geographical makeup of Brazil, it will not be disposed to border conflicts. So we have to engage Brazil, always keep them close, always keep them informed, and work with them. And then we have Venezuela, where we have to maintain good relations, use the technology to be able to monitor what is happening with Venezuela. Because one of the dynamic things about these relationships is whenever a government in Venezuela is in trouble domestically, the easiest thing for them to do is to start the saber rattling about Guyana. So we have got to be cognizant of that and preempt them when we see the crisis coming and work with nations to deal with that. Now, we have to have an active foreign policy. We are not militarily equipped to deal with Venezuela, but it is well established that the geographical area that Venezuela will have to come through is dense jungle, and he who has the upper hand in jungle warfare and jungle training will be useful. While we do not believe we want to get into a fight with Venezuela, we must give ourselves the maximum capacity we could afford militarily to ensure that Venezuela doesn't believe, oh, I could just get up and walk in there and it's over. And I believe over the last couple of years, we have allowed both Suriname and Venezuela to believe that military-wise, they could just come in. We will have to change that. So it is action on the diplomatic front, action on the military front, and then action on the domestic front in terms of educating people. I have been very critical of the government not having a continuous education program to keep our children and all Guyanese educated on the Guyana-Venezuela territorial controversy. Because even with, I believe that the ICJ will rule in our favor, but that ruling will not be accepted by Venezuela, and therefore there is still need for the raising of political consciousness, the mobilization of external support, and the preparation of the military for whatever eventuality. So through a combination of those approaches, I am prepared to work to keep Venezuela at bay.
I think that certainly the continuous education internally is something that many have advocated for, and I think yet to see a cohesive internal education around the issue of Venezuela and the border controversy. As you just mentioned, so on the last flare up, if you will, of this issue, there were lots of meetings Venezuela related in the diaspora. And among some groups, there was a sense that these meetings were not as cohesive as they ought to have been. They did not fully reflect the national strength for many of the reasons that I think you would be well aware. And so I wanted to ask about a question of inclusion. Starting with your role as someone who is focused on young people, who's focused on women, and certainly you've mentioned the diaspora many times here. Often some of these groups feel alienated. We see some of this in they're broadly demanding a different kind of politics. What does Aubrey Norton say to these groups to give them a real seat at the table in shaping Guyana for tomorrow?
Well, let's start with the women. The parliament stipulates a percentage of women that should be in parliament. That is one that is already there. But I think it is more than that. It is getting women active, empowering them, and having institutions that can come to their assistance to continuously empower them. That to me is critical. Even when you talk about domestic violence, the police in Guyana has not been prepared as yet to deal with the question of domestic violence. We still operate as if, oh, does a man and woman matter? Let them fight it out. And by that time, the woman is dead. So you have to reorient the police. You have to reorient the society to take a different look and approach to women, while at the same time educating women and improving their quality of life. Because a lot of time a woman doesn't move out from a man because they are economically dependent. And if that economic dependency isn't removed, you will have the same problem. So you also have got to work to economically empower women. When you look at the women that are abused, you see unfortunate women. You see women who don't have an option, who don't have an alternative. The system has got to give them an alternative. And that is what we will focus on. Empower them to the point where they have alternatives, they can develop their economic base, etc., and reduce their dependence on men, especially abusive men. In the case of the youth, we have to re-educate the youth. And we have to, I've said very early, that we will have to have a lot of youth leadership training. One of the problems of our youth is the absence of leadership amongst them to give them the leadership they need. And so they end up sometimes relating to people outside of their generation who do not understand their generation, and they feel excluded. You have to train them, let them give other young people leadership. You have to develop community-based organizations where youth can be involved and exercise their abilities. There is need for a comprehensive program as it relates to sport and recreation. We have allowed entertainment to deteriorate to the point where we take the worst music as the entertainment for young people, when there are other music and art forms that are progressive and can change the thinking. I have said that we have to focus on the arts because a lot of young people are in the arts, and once they can realize that creative talent, they will be more useful. But there are a number of things I would say. Today I was saying to a group, we have to produce in this country a network of night schools, because the level of dropout from the secondary schools would have left us with, on average, about 15,000 to 16,000 children do the grade 6, or what we know as common entrance. By the time they meet Form 5, only about 5 or 6,000 will get 5 CXC with math and English. You're talking about a roughly 10,000 children every year that are out there with little or no scope to move on to tertiary education and to other activities. Unless we can deal with that, and dealing with that, to me, you have to go back to the primary school, remove a lot of nonsense from it, let the children focus on read, write, count, reason, and comprehend. And once you give them that base to grade 4, and then they arrive at grade 6, you will then be producing the child that could go on to secondary school and do better. So we have to rectify the extant problems while revisiting the education system to improve it from bottom coming up. We have said that we will set up a network of early childhood education centers so that we can train people in parenting and helping children, because the time has long gone where the village brings up the child. The village sometimes now is contaminating the child. And therefore, we have got to find new mechanisms and institutions to help our children to develop in the way we want them to develop. It's long term.
Well, I think that's as you were speaking, I mean, it's a question of the arts. I mean, I grew up in North Ranville, and this was a community that was built in support of one of the early Care Festa, and so the arts was certainly something that was vital for us, and it is definitely one of the areas as you rightly noted, where we see a kind of diminution of the kinds of artistic representations that are young people are engaged in. And so, it is good to see that is part of the priorities that you have. The time is running on us. So maybe I want to think of this in terms of the last question. It's 7:50, and I know that you're pressed and you have an hour. So I wanted to do, maybe I can ask two parts, maybe three parts. So, what are the top priorities for the first 100 days of the Norton presidency?
Man, I got them right here, but I ain't got the time to read them out. Look, I would say the main priority is to pass a supplementary budget to reallocate resources in a much more fair and transparent way, and to reallocate resources for human resource development. This government, because it pursues corruption and it wants the family, friends, and favorite to benefit, would have made the priority infrastructure. There is need for infrastructure. But when infrastructure becomes a means to corruption, it affects the society. And so in those first 100 days, we have got to get a supplementary budget, change the focus of the allocation of resources, ensuring that resources will go to the people. We increase their wages and salaries to give them a livable income. We will have to focus on those things to set the base, so when you get your full budget, you put your social and economic packages in place. We said within our 100 days, we will re-engage ExxonMobil under Article 24.1 to be able to begin the process of negotiating to ensure that we will get more from the oil sector. In the first 100 days, we have to revisit the gas to energy project with the aim of making it viable and ensuring that it could come on stream. It was scheduled to be here, I think, in 2022. It moved to 2023. It moved to 2024. It moved to 2025. Now it is at 2026. What that means, almost immediately the cost for electricity will be going up. And then we have to now look at the new option of ISO containerized gas and see how we approach it. So we have listed a lot of things. I don't want to read them out. We have the bad fortune of when we say what we're doing. We've been saying for the longest while, we'll set up a system of early childhood education. Today, the government announced that they're doing it too.
Well, good ideas tend to.
And for that, I'm thankful. All I do is point out to them that it is our original idea. Remember, the government said no to cash transfers. And when the pressure build up, they do it as if they are God sent when they were forced to do it.
So we're at 7:54 and there's 6 minutes. So I want to pose this hypothetical for you. So it's 2030 and you're looking back on 5 years of your presidency. How would you, what would you say have been your successes, and what were the things that you did that, in some sense, that made Guyanese across every divide, thankful that they made the choice of Aubrey Norton in 2025?
One, I want to see the significant reduction, if not eradication, of poverty. Poverty eradication is fundamental for me. Two, I want to see the human resource of Guyana on a better footing and are in a better position to contribute to the society. I want to see people living a better quality life in housing, I would like to see significant improvement. We have outlined how we will do it in our manifesto. So for me, at the end of 5 years, if we put people first, if we are ensuring that money are going to the people of Guyana, if we are ensuring that we are diversifying the economy and ensuring a more dynamic non-oil sector with increasing micro and small businesses, I would be happy. I would be considerably happy.
And get ready to go for the second term?
Well, that time we'll talk about that. I'm 68, you know.
President Trump
I can't run too far
is
right.
almost 80 and he's still pushing. So
Well, everybody different. I have been in politics since 50 years of age in 1972. So somebody might be 80 and they only had 40 years. I already had 50 something.
I see. Well, Aubrey Norton, I want to thank you on behalf of the Guyana Business Journal Magazine, and really to extend our deepest gratitude for you for sharing, this personal journey, your vision, your policy priorities with us this evening. I think that I hope David Hines might have listened. I think you've done us you've widened the lens by taking us back to the earliest days of the indigenous resistance and the coming of the Europeans through emancipation, independence, and now the age of oil. And I think that framing has opened up sort of some new possibilities and perhaps responsibilities within the context of this oil era. And I think you've sort of reminded us that, while, we're in a political competition, election is not really just about the political competition, but it's about whether we can finally fulfill this promise of dignity and equity and genuine freedom for all Guyanese. And I also appreciated, and I actually thought you were born in Georgetown and grew up in Linden.
No, I born in Linden. I am a born and bred Lindener.
Lindener, I see.
Yeah.
And so I appreciated these reflections on your upbringing in Linden, and the transformative power of the free education project, which was carried out in the time before oil, and the way in which this kind of underscores your people-centered development and your sort of focus on bridging the sort of gaps between economic and social divide. And I think you've outlined a vision for Guyana that really prioritizes.
We also said we'll bridge the gap between hinterland and coastland.
Between hinterland and coastland, between urban and rural, between rich and poor. And I think that it's interesting that emerges in some very nice way from your education and growth in Linden. And I think it speaks well, it augurs well for, not someone who's going to show up and say, I'm going to be people-centered, but then finally, when they have the opportunity to be people-centered, I think that often many people fail with, but I think you've reflected that really well. And I'm very appreciative. And certainly, the concrete priorities that you've shared for the first 100 days of the presidency, the supplementary budget, the reallocation of resources, really the focus on human development, re-engaging with Exxon, launching the early childhood initiatives, all with the goal, and I think that's important, of reducing and eradicating poverty. And certainly that's a very, very important thing within the context of Guyana, because as you know, as well as I do, we have a poverty rate of about, certainly if I want to be generous, 45% of the people, if I take what the folks at the IDB say, live on $5.50 a day in the midst of this moment when we have. So I think we need leadership that recognizes that, and you've certainly expressed that sort of leadership. To the audience, I want to thank you. There have been quite a few people who've joined in. I hope the conversation has been enlightening. I hope you haven't had an opportunity to take a different look beyond the sort of caricature, beyond the sort of fleeting TikTok video. And I think that my hope is that these dialogues will help to deepen our understanding of, our shared history, the present challenges, and the collective effort that is required for, a true democratic renewal and national progress. And so I want to invite you in viewer land, listener land, stay engaged as we do this series with the diversity of voices, the political leaders, the thinkers, and the members of our society that, will make Guyana in this age of oil. And again, on your behalf, I want to thank you, Leader Norton, for sharing this hour with us. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
It's been very much appreciated. Thank you.